what you can't explain. It's coming back again. I can see it now, I can see it now. What you can't explain, coming back again.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. So this case that we're going to talk about today started back in 2019. And when it came across my desk a few weeks ago, I was really surprised that it happened so long ago, but I hadn't heard that much about it, considering that this is one of the most horrific crimes I have come across in a long time. 33-year-old Jaime Ray Feden was just 4'1" and 75 pounds. But according to anyone who ever knew her, anyone she had ever encountered, she had the biggest heart. She was a kind soul, a caring friend, and a woman living with a rare condition called Vader syndrome. Jaime had spent her life navigating a world that wasn't always built for someone like her, but despite the stares, the judgment, and the potential discrimination, Jaime remained full of light, always smiling for the residents that she cared for at a local retirement home, and even confronting mistreatment publicly when she was denied entry to a casino because she looked too young.
29-year-old Jaime Feden is often mistaken for a child. She was diagnosed with a rare condition called Vader syndrome.
People don't believe me. They say, you're not 29.
Feden reached out to KDKA News after an incident at the Meadows Casino. She forgot her ID, and they wouldn't let her in, saying she, quote, looked too young.
In fact, I've had people come up to me on the street and say, where's your mom?
In this exclusive video, Feden walks around the fountain at Gateway Center with her male friend who accompanied her to the interview. Feden said he's the one who went with her to the casino that night, the night she said she faced discrimination because of her height.
I was singled out. And the only reason is because of my size.
That clip, now haunting, was Jaime's way of telling the world, I deserve to be seen. But 3 years after that interview, Jaime vanished. What followed was a tangled and disturbed investigation that would stretch across state lines, from the quiet streets of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, to the barren desert outside Las Vegas. A manipulative man with a twisted past, a fake CIA badge, and a chilling plan, burner phone numbers, fake messages, zip ties, in the guise of a BDSM photo shoot that was anything but. What happened to Jaime is not only a tragic story of betrayal and calculated cruelty, but it's also a case that raises urgent questions about how predators isolate and exploit the vulnerable, and how many red flags go ignored before it's too late. I also do want to make note that this criminal in the case that we're about to talk about is one of the dumbest we have yet to encounter. He's just an absolute moron. They always say that if criminals were smart, they wouldn't get caught, but this guy brings dumb criminals to a whole new level. So we have a lot to discuss today. But before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark, a VPN that I've actually used for a while and one that I trust, especially when I'm researching the kinds of twisted, real-life crime stories that we cover on this channel. When I'm digging into court documents, police reports, or obscure newspaper archives, I don't want my search history raising eyebrows, and I definitely don't want my data being tracked, sold, or exposed. Surfshark encrypts everything I do online, keeping my digital footprint private and secure. And the best part is, at least for me, with just one subscription, you can protect unlimited devices. Your phone, laptop, tablet, even your smart TV. And I, like you, have children who are of a vulnerable age that I want to protect, and I even have parents who are of kind of a vulnerable age that I want to protect. So not only can you protect all of your devices, but you can protect your kids' cell phones, their tablets, their gaming systems. You can protect your parents' phones and laptops so they're not getting, weird scammy stuff. And with 3,200 plus servers in 100 countries, you can connect from virtually anywhere, bypass censorship, and access region-locked content. Surfshark is also a lifesaver when I'm traveling. I've used it to avoid location price-based gouging on flights. I've used it to stay safe on public Wi-Fi, like at the airports and hotels. And I've used it to keep access to my bank accounts while abroad. Oh, and if the VPN connection ever drops, Surfshark's kill switch makes sure your info doesn't accidentally leak out. They've literally thought of everything, and they don't log any of your activity ever, period. So if you care about privacy, if you're a digital researcher like me, or if you just want to stream your favorite shows from anywhere, and we have talked about the privacy and safety benefits of Surfshark, but we haven't really talked about the entertainment benefits of Surfshark. With Surfshark VPN, if you want to watch a television show or a movie that's not available in your country, all you have to do is use Surfshark to connect to the country that it is available in, and there you go. You have a whole new plethora of entertainment options. So I highly recommend giving Surfshark a try, and all you have to do is go to surfshark.com/stephanieharlowe and use code stephanieharlowe at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark for free, which is a really great deal. 4 extra months for free. So once again, that is surfshark.com/stephanieharlowe. There's an E on the end of Stephanie and Harlowe, and don't forget to use my code Stephanie Harlowe. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. On October 5th, 2019, Henry Linso was driving back to Las Vegas after taking his son and his son's friend on a day trip to see an antique train engine. The drive through the Nevada desert was long and boring, on both sides. It just looks the same for miles and miles and miles. So at some point, about 90 miles outside of Vegas, Henry pulled over on a dirt road for a break so they could all kind of get out, stretch their legs. Now at that point, the two boys spotted something out in the desert. They thought it could have been a dead coyote, but they couldn't determine what it was. So Henry told them to get back in the truck so that he could go and check it out. And that is when he encountered the most horrific scene he had ever or would ever see. He came across a body that at first he thought belonged to a child.
She was laying about 50 yards off the road.
The three were driving back from an antique train show in the middle of a vast desert with nowhere to stop. They pulled off a secluded dirt road. The kids saw what they thought was a dead coyote. The dad walked over and his jaw dropped.
I remember her feet being so small. That's one thing that caught my eyes was her feet and her hands.
But it was what sat perfectly placed on top of a rock in the wilderness, the sun reflecting off of something he knew would be a bombshell in discovering who this person was.
Next to her right hand was a gold ring placed on a rock. It was perfectly placed on a rock, I believe. That's still stuck in my head.
Linso said it was like a prize left behind for someone to see.
And the way she was murdered is horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Henry Linso noticed that the body was already decomposing, and there were no clothes on the body, no clothes anywhere in the vicinity. And since it was such a remote area, this isn't someplace a tourist would go, this isn't someplace you would go to have a nice walk, it's the middle of the desert, very barren, very out of the way. Henry Linso genuinely believed that if he hadn't by chance accidentally stumbled upon this body, it still would have been there, as in nobody would have ever found it. So Linso called the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, and then he drove the 90 miles back to Las Vegas, completely and understandably traumatized. Henry said, quote, "It was a long drive home to think about what could have happened, what you don't want to think happened. Then you start thinking about the family." End quote. The body, which had no identification on it, was transferred to the Clark County Coroner's Office, where it remained under the name Jane Doe. But the folks at the coroner's office had high hopes that this wouldn't be an unidentified body forever, because there were aspects to this body that made it pretty recognizable. Although the body didn't belong to a child, the woman who it did belong to was very short in stature and had certain physical characteristics that the coroner's office felt would make it easy for identification. Now, Jaime Ray Feden was last seen on September 15th, 2019, and she was reported missing out of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, 2 months later on November 14th, 2019. Up until the summer before her disappearance, Jaime had worked at the Sheridan at Bethel Park retirement home, and everyone loved her there. Her coworkers, the residents. She was described as being incredibly friendly, always down for a happy conversation, always having a smile on her face. And she then, had sort of quit her job, I guess, or taken a hiatus because she was going to go on a trip with her boyfriend. And then nobody heard from her for a few months, right? So on November 12th, the Bethel Park Police Department conducted a welfare check on Jaime at the request of one of her very close friends, as well as one of her cousins. The friend and the cousin hadn't spoken directly to Jaime in some time. They had sort of communicated with her in a different way, but they had not heard her voice or talked to her in 2 months. And Jaime's neighbors hadn't seen Jaime or her access van that she used due to her medical condition for 2 months as well. And this was concerning, especially because of Jaime's medical condition, Vader syndrome. Vader syndrome is a rare congenital disorder, meaning it's present at birth, and it involves abnormalities in multiple organ systems. In fact, the name Vader is an acronym representing the areas of the body most commonly affected. Not the only areas of the body affected, but the ones most commonly affected. So the V stands for vertebral defects, problems with the spine, such as missing or malformed vertebrae or scoliosis. The A stands for anal atresia, which is the absence or malformation of the anus, which can cause severe digestive issues at birth. The T stands for tracheoesophageal fistula, which is an abnormal connection between the esophagus and the trachea, which can cause breathing and feeding problems. The E stands for esophageal atresia, which is where the esophagus ends in a pouch instead of connecting to the stomach. And the R stands for renal abnormalities, so basically kidney issues, malformations, or absence of one or both kidneys, which can lead to a lot of issues from urinary tract problems to kidney failure. So it's November 14th, 2019. Officers arrived at Jaime's townhouse on Timber Ridge Drive in Bethel Park, where they met up with one of Jaime's really close friends and Jaime's cousin. And both of these women claimed that they were concerned about Jaime because she had become distant the past few months. She hadn't been answering phone calls or text messages, and she was, as far as they knew, in the presence of her boyfriend, her on-again, off-again boyfriend, who she had sort of a tumultuous past with. That's what the criminal complaint says. That's how Jaime's friend and cousin described her relationship with her boyfriend. But they did say that Jaime had been briefly communicating with them over Facebook Messenger. However, Jaime's cousin and friend didn't believe that it was Jaime talking to them in these messages because the messages didn't sound like Jaime, and nothing was adding up. Neighbors of Jaime's also told police that although they had not seen her or her vehicle at the townhouse for 2 months, they had seen quite a bit of her on-again, off-again boyfriend, 39-year-old John Matthew Chapman. According to neighbors, he was seen entering and exiting the residence several times, and he'd been there as recently as the previous day, November 13th. Chapman was seen driving a silver or gray Honda Ridgeline truck, and neighbors reported that he was frequently removing large loads of trash from Jaime's townhouse. So Jaime's cousin informed the police also that Jaime's mother sadly had passed away from cancer when she was just 11 years old, and Jaime's uncle, the cousin's father, Keith Lewis, had been helping manage the trust for his niece. So Jaime's mother had put her in a trust, and Keith Lewis, her uncle, was helping her kind of manage that. Keith also owned the townhouse that Jamie lived in. So police called Keith Lewis and they asked him if they had permission to enter the residence by force, which he agreed to. But he also informed them that Jamie was the only person who was listed as a resident at that townhouse, and therefore she was the only person who should have been there, which, as we know, isn't true because her boyfriend, John Matthew Chapman, is going in and out for the past 2 months. So the Bethel Park Police Department did enter Jamie's townhouse, and inside they found a few alarming items. First, they located a cell phone on the kitchen table, and next to that, they found a fake CIA identification with John Chapman's name and photo on it. John Chapman is Jaime Feden's boyfriend. Now, law enforcement also located 3 backpacks. Inside one of these backpacks, they found several bras and underwear that were larger than Jaime Feden's size. And I'm not sure if the bras and underwear were multiple different sizes, just all bigger than Jamie's, meaning they belonged to multiple, different women, or if they were all one size and just belonged to one woman who was larger than Jamie. Because, Jamie was very tiny, like we already talked about. Short in stature. She's, under 75 pounds. So it's going to be very clear to the police that these bras and underwear are not going to fit Jaime Feden. I don't know, however, if the bras and underwear were all different sizes, as in they could belong to multiple people, or all the same size. And this is going to be important because for a reason we're going to talk about later. In another backpack, they found wire cutters, multiple zip ties, and a roll of duct tape. So Detective Wright with the Bethel Park Police Department, he spoke to Jamie's cousin again. So this was kind of after a cursory look around the townhouse, and while the other police officers are going through and cataloging and taking pictures, Detective Wright goes out to talk to Jamie's cousin. And Jamie's cousin informed him that someone was using Jamie's Facebook Messenger pretending to be Jamie. And this person claimed that Jamie had gotten a new cell phone number. So Jamie's real cell phone number, the one she'd used for a while, the one that everybody knew to call her on, it ended in 3837. And after calling this number, police realized that the cell phone that they found on the kitchen table did belong to Jamie, because as they were calling it, the screen was lighting up. Now, according to Facebook messages from Jamie's account, Facebook messages she sent to her cousin and to, friends, she had a new phone number, and that new phone number ended in 8391. And on November 14th, while in the company of detectives, Jamie's cousin told Detective Wright, hey, I'm going to send this new cell phone number a text message, and I'm going to kind of set a trap. I'm going to claim that a fake relative named Uncle Ralph has passed away, right? Uncle Ralph doesn't exist. So if they send this text to Jamie saying Uncle Ralph died, and Jamie, responds back and is like, who the hell is Uncle Ralph? Okay, more likely that it's Jamie, because Uncle Ralph isn't a real person. But if the phone number that Jamie's, allegedly using replies back like, oh, so sorry, or, I feel bad, my sympathies. Obviously not Jamie, because Jamie would know she doesn't have an Uncle Ralph. So the number actually replied to Jamie's cousin with a message that said, quote, I'm sorry, when did he die? End quote. Obviously this isn't Jamie. So Jamie's cousin wrote back to the number, quote, yesterday, Graham's been calling you. I know you really liked him. End quote. Now the number replied back, quote, I'm sorry to be distant, but the way everyone has treated me, I don't feel like part of the family anymore. End quote. Like I said, this is obviously not Jamie, but somebody's using her phone, and now we have to figure out who. So Detective Wright did a search of the cell phone number ending in 8391. That was the new number that whoever's using Jamie's Facebook Messenger claimed she was now, using as her real cell phone number. And Detective Wright found that this number belonged to Ad Hoc Labs. Ad Hoc Labs is an LA-based software company specializing in mobile applications, and they are best known for their flagship app, Burner, which, the name kind of gives it away, but it provides users with a temporary disposable phone number to protect privacies in various situations, such as online transactions, dating, business communications, like Facebook Messenger sales that are super sketchy. Burner, the app, also has features that include spam blocking, auto-reply messages, voicemail transcription, and the ability to burn a number when it's no longer needed. The app also masks the originating cell number during communication, so it's kind of like a Google Voice thing. you're using your same cell phone, but you have like a second number on the cell phone, but you can respond to messages and calls and things from both numbers using one cell phone. So obviously, law enforcement contacted Ad Hoc Labs, and they got information from the company saying that that 8391 number was actually masking the real cell phone number of John Matthew Chapman, Jamie's boyfriend. And here's one of the ways that Chapman is the dumbest criminal of all time. He could have just purchased an actual burner phone, right? He could have gone into like Walgreens or any drugstore, any store, and, spent $20 in cash on one of those prepaid cell phones that doesn't, track back to his name or his number or anything, and then he could have just thrown it out. But instead, he used some masking application on his actual and real phone, which obviously led police right to him. Now, Detective Wright was also present when Jamie's cousin began receiving angry messages from the 8391 number, and someone pretending to be Jamie told her cousin that she was upset. Jamie allegedly, unquote, quote unquote, Jamie was upset because the police had gone to John Chapman's mother's house, and Jamie, the person pretending to be Jamie, told her cousin, you've gone too far, you crossed a line, I'm absolutely fine. Why are you sicking the police on my boyfriend? Just kind of very angry, telling the cousin enough is enough. And the cousin responded to the person pretending to be Jamie, and she told this fake Jamie figure, listen, just call me right now. Call me right now, let me hear your voice so everyone can have proof that you're okay and we can be comforted, and then we'll leave you and your dumbass boyfriend alone, right? She didn't say that. As far as I know, she didn't say that, but that's probably what she wanted to say. Jamie's cousin then received a call from John Chapman's cell number, and he told her that not only was he going to file harassment charges on her because the police were now hounding him, but he threatened her, making this the second thing to come out that proves Chapman is just a dumb person and a dumb criminal. Chapman told the cousin that he knew how to get heroin, and if she didn't back off, he was going to plant it on her farm so that she would lose her kids. And this is happening while the police are there. And granted, Chapman probably doesn't know that the police are right there, but he has to understand that Jamie's cousin is already in contact with law enforcement, so the police either could potentially be standing right next to her while he's making these threats to do something illegal with drugs to set her up, or he has to entertain the possibility that Jamie's cousin has some connection and communication with the police, and she could just call them and tell them what he was saying. You will come to find that John Chapman has an anger problem and absolutely no self-control. So after threatening Jamie's cousin, John Chapman hung up the phone, and then he called the Bethel Park Police Department, and he spoke to Officer Johnson, who was BPPD's communications officer. Chapman told Johnson that Jamie wasn't missing. Jamie was fine. He'd seen Jamie at her place the day before, November 13th, right before he'd left to drive to Maryland. He also claimed that he'd been talking to Jamie through Facebook Messenger, as well as her new cell phone number, the one ending in 8391, which we already know wasn't a new cell phone number, but Chapman using an app on his phone pretending to be Jamie. So John Chapman was like, listen, this is insane. This is ridiculous. I'm just going to go to Jamie's townhouse. I'm going to pick her up and I'm going to bring her to the police station so everyone can see she's alive. Everyone can chill out and just leave me alone, And Officer Johnson was like, yeah, that sounds great. You should bring her in eventually and we can tie up all these loose ends. But right now, we need to know where she is. Right now, we need to know that she's okay. So why don't you have Jamie call us right now, as soon as possible. And then, whatever. You can come into the police station together later on and we can all laugh about this. So John Chapman agreed and hung up. But obviously, Jamie didn't call the police station. And John Chapman would make a few more phone calls to the police over, that day and the next. And during these calls, he gave false and conflicting information about Jaime Feden's location and status. So on the evening of November 15th, 2019, John Matthew Chapman was arrested on charges of criminal use of communication facility, which basically means that he, committed a felony, a third-degree felony, when using a cell phone to commit, cause, or facilitate a crime. And this is basically just a placeholder charge at this point. Yes, he did do something illegal by pretending to be Jamie and, using this phone and communicating with people pretending to be her. But the fact that law enforcement had not yet located Jamie or her remains meant that they could not technically charge him with murder yet. They didn't really have proof or evidence that foul play had happened. Like, they definitely suspected it, just like you and I sitting here right now know what's going on here. But they didn't have evidence or proof, so they couldn't charge him with murder. They had to hold him. They had to interview him, which is what they did. And during the police interrogation, which was recorded, John Matthew Chapman confessed to the murder of Jaime Feden. And the story he told was the absolute definition of evil. Now, he said that he and Jamie had planned a trip to Vegas, and he knew that he was going to kill her on this trip. But he told her that the trip was a vacation, and it was also like a fact-finding mission to see if the two could locate a place to live in Las Vegas. And friends of Jamie's would later testify that Jamie was really excited about the trip to Vegas and that she was planning to start a new life with Chapman there. So obviously this is something he had been telling her for a while, let's get out of here, start fresh someplace else, across the country, basically. We're going to live in Vegas. One friend stated that Jamie told her the two would be gone for about 2 weeks, but Jamie had saved for this trip for nearly a year. And according to the criminal complaint, Chapman and Jamie arrived in the Vegas area on September 23rd. And 2 days later, on September 25th, John Chapman lured Jamie out into the desert under the guise of taking some bondage-themed photographs. And he's confessing to this to the police. The reason that we know this story is because he told it to them on the 15th, November 15th, when he was interviewed by the police. He told them this. And Chapman said that once he had Jamie out in this isolated, off-the-beaten-path area, he bound her hands and legs together with zip ties. He then tied her to a signpost and covered her mouth and nose with duct tape. And then he stepped back and he watched as his girlfriend suffocated to death. You heard me right. I know this sounds like, crazy, It would be bad enough if he zip-tied her to a signpost, covered her mouth and nose with duct tape, and then got in his car and got the hell out of there. But he didn't do that. He stepped back and stood there and watched as she ran out of oxygen and died. And then when he felt sure that she was dead, John Chapman removed Jamie from the signpost. He removed her clothing. He then left her body there, obviously, got back into his vehicle, and began the drive back to Pennsylvania. Now, according to Chapman's confession, during this 30-plus hour journey, he discarded items of Jamie's clothing as he drove. I'm not sure if he just threw them out the window as he drove or if he pulled over and stopped at dumpsters and things in different states and threw clothes out. But either way, he confessed to doing it and he told them that's what he did. So it doesn't really matter. They don't have to track that stuff down. But Chapman also not only confessed to his entire, murder plot and exactly what he did, the gory details of that, he also told the police about his motive. He said he'd killed Jamie for money. And you must be wondering, how much money did this girl have? Did she have millions? Did she have hundreds of thousands of dollars? No, Jamie didn't even have that much money. According to Jamie's uncle, she was getting $200 a week from her mother's trust. And for quite a while, every cent of that had been siphoned into John Chapman's bank account. That was pretty much the only money she had. And, plus her apartment and things were paid for through the trust. But still, it's not as if this is some White Lotus situation and this woman is, a multi-millionaire heiress and this man's going to marry her for her money and then kill her for the life insurance. This is not this kind of situation. It's not even that much money. And honestly, you'd kind of think with Jamie gone, that money wouldn't continue unless John Chapman could just make it seem like she'd gone missing. It just doesn't make any sense. But John Chapman told detectives, I did it for the money. And then he said before they'd even left for their trip, he'd prepared what he called a kill kit. So this idiot not only confessed to murder, but he confessed to premeditated murder, even though later he would try, to give every excuse in the book for why his confession wasn't valid. But when I say he's an idiot for confessing, I don't mean like, oh, you shouldn't have confessed. You should be a good criminal and just never tell the truth. No, I mean, if he was confessing for the right reasons, like, I feel terrible. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this since. I really want Jamie's family to have answers and know what happened, and I'm going to take my medicine and I'm going to get the penalties that I deserve for this. I'm going to face the music. No, that's not why he confessed. He just confessed because he's an idiot and he thought there was some benefit in confessing. He thought there was some benefit to him in confessing, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But after killing Jaime Feden, John Chapman returned to Bethel Park, and he pretended to be the victim. Jamie had broken up with him, and he'd been forced to return home, heartbroken and alone. But according to law enforcement, John Chapman wasn't that heartbroken, as he was dating someone else right away. In fact, based on the timeline, it looks like he was dating this new woman and had probably met her before Jamie's death. After news of Jamie's disappearance and Chapman's arrest hit the news cycle, a woman called the Bethel Park Police Department and told them that she was dating John Chapman currently, and she'd also been inside of Jamie's townhouse. This woman claimed that on their second date, which took place on September 28th, so basically right when Chapman got back into town from Vegas, she said John Chapman brought her to this townhouse, and he told her it had belonged to his uncle who had recently passed away. Chapman also told this woman that he was an Allegheny County jail guard, which wasn't true, but as we're going to find out, Chapman has a pattern of pretending to be someone and something he isn't. Apparently, John Chapman is not just a cold-blooded killer, but a natural-born con artist. In 2014, Chapman pleaded guilty to 26 counts in a stolen identity tax refund scheme. He had stolen the names and social security numbers of several classmates at a school for the learning disabled. He then filed tax paperwork in their names and collected their tax returns and bank accounts that he controlled. And this took place between 2007 and 2011. And losses from Chapman's scheme apparently totaled approximately $113,000. So he stole $113,000 from his classmates at a school for people with special needs. Okay? Pretty despicable. So in 2017, Chapman was jailed, and he was charged with terroristic threat and disorderly conduct after threatening to kill someone who had made fun of his girlfriend on social media. This incident had happened on November 6th, 2017, and the police say he threatened to shoot someone, but they found no weapon on his person or at his home. But Chapman's weird crimes actually go back even further, because in 2006, he was charged in Richland Township with counts relating to impersonating a bounty hunter. Evidently, John Matthew Chapman was a big fan of Dog the Bounty Hunter. Why wouldn't he be at this point, right? Like, that actually makes perfect sense. And at that time, he had created a fake bail bond agency called Chapman Bail Bonds. Super creative. In addition to pretending to be a bounty hunter, Chapman had created a fake photo ID that listed him as a bail enforcement agent, and he also carried around a fake badge and a pair of handcuffs. Chapman's fake life began to unravel when a girlfriend of his attempted to buy a cell phone at the Galleria, which I think is like a mall, and she used a bad check to buy the cell phone, and then she left the store with the cell phone. And I guess employees of the store tried to stop her from leaving, and there was a big scene, and employees of that store would tell police that Chapman showed up, flashing his fake badge, and he told them that this woman was a fugitive, a bail jumper that he had been tasked with finding. And apparently he expected them to drop the whole bad check issue, because he had bigger fish to fry with this suspect. Like, you don't know what this woman has done. This cell phone thing, you just got to let that go, okay? Because I need a new cell phone. That's what he's thinking, right? Because that cell phone's probably for him. He's like, you just got to let this go. Like, I gotta bring this woman in. I'm a bounty hunter. I'm Dog the Bounty Hunter. But obviously, no one at that store believed anything that he had to say. They called mall security. This led to Chapman's arrest and his eventual sentence of, wait for it, probation. I'm sure he really learned a lot from that harsh punishment. That's crazy, because This dude, John Matthew Chapman, he did do some time after his tax fraud scheme. But really, like, you're pretending to be a bounty hunter and you get like probation, and then you continue acting out and you continue doing stupid things. And it just seemed like John Matthew Chapman was just used to getting things in a very dishonest way, and he didn't know how to do it any other way. And there's actually a man named Adam Braden who grew up living next door to Chapman's mother, who, by the way, I believe John Matthew Chapman is adopted. I can't find any, like, legitimate news sources who go into depth, but a few news sources did say his adopted mother. So I think Chapman was adopted, but Adam Braden lived next door to Chapman's mother, and he commented on John Matthew Chapman's ability to use others to get what he wanted, saying, quote, "It just feels like everybody in John's life is a tool that he can use to advance his own agenda. Everyone in his life is a resource." End quote. So Adam Braden was also familiar with John Chapman's other passions, besides conning people. And these passions, outside of Dog the Bounty Hunter, included video games and women. Not only had Chapman been married multiple times, but he always had different girlfriends, even when he was married. In fact, when John Chapman was dating Jaime Feden, he was already married to another woman named Maureen Chapman. The two had tied the knot in 2018, a year prior to Jaime's murder. Now, Maureen has spoken out, claiming that her husband, John Chapman, sent her texts and made phone calls to her discussing Jaime Feden and Jaime's disappearance and her death.
He said, "Hun, I murdered a woman because I had to."
Maureen Chapman says her world stopped when she got a 6 a.m. phone call from her husband, John Chapman. He had just been booked in jail and was being questioned for the kidnapping and murder of Bethel Park woman Jaime Feden.
What happens if she doesn't?
Maureen reads the eerie last text messages her husband sent her.
They're going to rule it like I kidnapped her and did something to her.
Police say John Chapman confessed to taking Feden to the Nevada desert, tying her to a signpost and watching her suffocate.
Why would he take someone's life?
Maureen says she's now haunted by the man she trusted her life with.
Jamie's not the only one that was asked to go to Vegas recently. I was asked to go to Vegas. His recent girlfriend.
Every day, she says another one of her husband's lies unravels, like his job at the CIA and their first date after meeting online. John Chapman took her to a townhome where they had pizza and watched movies. Turns out it wasn't his home, it was Jaime Feden's.
And to think how many other women had gone to Jamie's apartment. And then knowing how many women went afterwards. His confession is probably the only thing I do believe.
Maureen says she's taking it one day at a time, knowing she may never know just how many victims exist.
The true victim here, Jaime was. And there's lots of other victims in this. I'm not by myself.
So we just heard Maureen allude to something, that Jaime had not been the only one asked to go to Vegas recently by John Matthew Chapman. And that's very interesting, considering what Chapman's first wife, Kelly Murray, had to say. Yes, John Chapman was married not once, but twice, and he was dating Jaime Feden basically the entire time, I believe through like both these marriages. So Murray and Chapman had met on MySpace in 2009, and the following year they tied the knot in Vegas. And Kelly Murray says she's stunned by what happened to Jaime Feden, but not surprised to hear about her ex-husband's manipulations because he had lied to her consistently throughout their 7-year marriage. Chapman had told Kelly that he was the uncle of Dwayne Chapman, which just so happens to be the real name of Dog the Bounty Hunter. He had also told her he worked for the government, and not only did he date other women while they were married, but when the IRS questioned him about his tax scheme in 2014, he asked his then-wife Kelly to take the fall for it. And although all of these things are troubling, they are not the most troubling details Kelly Murray had to tell about John Chapman.
The question should be, has he done this before?
Kelly Murray and John Chapman got married in 2010. They met on MySpace. He wooed her. And a year later, they tied the knot in Vegas.
We went to the stained glass wedding chapel.
But the honeymoon phase didn't last long.
He tried saying that he worked for the government and that he was either FBI, CIA, or NSA and that he was in the Navy.
Even though Chapman was married, he dated other women.
He is a manipulator. He's a liar.
This appears to be his profile on Plenty of Fish.
I love watching movies and taking road trips. And it says diamond in the rough.
And then there was something Murray found.
I found plastic Ziploc baggies with female underwear, but they were individually bagged with names.
How many would you say you saw?
About 5 to 10.
Before the two divorced, the Chapman stayed in Pittsburgh with Jaime Feden. But Kelly Chapman wasn't John's wife. She had to pretend she was John's sister.
He conned her into giving her almost every penny she had.
After Chapman's alleged murder confession, Murray's asking why.
Why? Why her? Did she know something that he didn't want anybody else knowing? That's what I think. She had something on him that he didn't want to get out.
And
what's his fascination with Vegas?
So she said she found individually wrapped women's underwear in plastic baggies with names on them. So first of all, this is crazy to me. If I'm married to somebody or dating somebody and I'm, I guess going through their stuff or just happening upon some of their items and I see plastic baggies with individually wrapped women's panties in them, and then names. I'm taking pictures of all of those, all right? I'm going to take pictures. I'm going to look those women up. I'm going to see, at first, if I'm just a normal person, I'm going to see if he's following any of them on social media, things like that. And then if I'm, Stephanie Harlowe, true crime person, I'm going to see if any of these women are missing or have turned up dead, okay? Because that sounds like the trophy collection of a serial killer, if you ask me. Or maybe he was like buying women's underwear online and that's why the names were on them. Either way, ew, gross. But let's go back to the underwear and the baggies. That's why I kind of wondered if the underwear they found in Jamie's apartment, and they said there was like bags of underwear and bras and stuff, were they all different sizes? Was he bringing his serial collection? Was he bringing his serial killer collection everywhere with him? Or did they belong to his wife or one of his girlfriends that he was bringing to the apartment? I don't know. I'm not sure. But like I said, those underwear in the bags definitely sounds like the trophy collection of a serial killer. And law enforcement working on the case kind of agrees.
We traveled deep in the desert, nearly 100 miles north of Las Vegas, to ask the Lincoln County Sheriff if John Chapman could have seriously hurt or swindled other women. His answer was chilling.
I wouldn't be surprised.
The FBI is now questioning Chapman's current wife, Maureen Chapman, and his ex-wife, Kelly Murray.
The thought that it could have been me, I think I got a little bit sick over it.
Chapman's ex-wife, Kelly, also said something there that we're going to discuss. We cannot overlook this, all right? I know that maybe it might be a hot button issue, but we can't overlook it. She said that while she and Chapman were still married, they lived with Jaime Feden, and she pretended to be Chapman's sister while he stole every penny that Jaime had. Trust me, we're going to talk about this because I know you guys have questions, and I know that this raised alarm bells for you as well. But first, speaking of trophies, let's also discuss what was found on John Matthew Chapman's phone. On November 20th, 2019, detectives obtained a search warrant for John Chapman's phone, and they discovered some photos in the recently deleted section of the phone. So understand, if you're an Android user, I don't think Androids have these, but when you delete a picture from an iPhone, it doesn't disappear right away. It goes into a different album called Recently Deleted. And then if you really wanted that picture permanently and totally delete it off your phone, you would either have to wait a number of days for that photo to permanently delete, or you'd have to physically go into the recently deleted album and permanently delete it yourself. And apparently this idiot, John Chapman, he didn't know that. He just deleted the photos, but they remained in that recently deleted album for detectives to find after his arrest, because the amount of days it takes for these photos to erase permanently is like 120 days. So they were still there when the police got his phone. And they found photos, 2 photos in particular that we're going to talk about. They found a photo from September 24th, 2019, taken on Chapman's phone at 5:39 p.m. of Jaime under a Vegas sign. And they found another photo taken on September 25th at 9:39 a.m. of Jamie in the desert, bound with zip ties, mouth and nose covered with duct tape.
Investigators say a picture of Feden tied up in the desert was found on John Chapman's cell phone.
A picture is a trophy. I don't see it any other way.
So I do see why Maureen, John's current wife, why she might see that photo as a trophy, and it certainly could have been. The existence of this photo in general is absolutely chilling, and it speaks even more to the depravity and the stupidity of John Matthew Chapman. But I also wonder if him snapping this photo was part of the ruse, right? Because he had told police he'd lured Jamie into the desert under the guise of taking some pictures for a bondage photo shoot. So him taking the picture could have been a part of that. You know, like to not have her be panicking. He could have been like, hold on, I'll be right over there. I'm just taking some pictures. And so that could have been what was happening. The picture could have been a trophy, or it could have served the dual purpose of being a trophy and making his photo shoot story more believable to Jamie in that moment or anyone else who happened to come across it in the future. But I made a note earlier and I said, I want to talk about why John Matthew Chapman decided to affix Jaime Feden to a signpost, right? Because he could have easily zip-tied her hands together, zip-tied her legs together, put duct tape over her mouth and nose, and just left her in a seated position for her to die, because he would eventually take her down from that signpost anyway, right? Why did he put her on the signpost, standing up? And that's why it leads me to believe that that photo was kind of more of a trophy, because having her sort of flayed out in that way, stood up on display, essentially, that's what it was. He was putting her on display. So when he stood back and watched her die, he had basically just a full body view, a better view. He could see the fear on her face. He could see her body struggling to get free. This person, John Matthew Chapman, is a psychopath as far as I'm concerned. There was no reason other than to put her on display so he could have a good show. There was no other reason to put her up on that signpost like that. Like I said, he would take her down eventually anyways. And some people might say, oh, it was probably like part of the whole bondage, like photo shoot, trickery thing. Now, he could have just told her like, hey, I want a picture of you on the floor of the desert, or like by a cactus or something with this bondage stuff on. He did not have to do that with the signpost. I think it was specifically to increase his enjoyment of watching her die. I genuinely do. So that's messed up. That's messed up. So the police arrest John Chapman and they interview him on November 15th. And after this, police from Bethel Park in Pennsylvania, they contacted the Clark County Coroner's Office in Nevada to see if they had any unidentified bodies there. And that's when they were told that the coroner's office did have a Jane Doe who matched the physical characteristics of Jaime Feden. And that Jane Doe was eventually identified as Jamie through dental records. And then John Chapman was charged with 1 count of kidnapping resulting in death. I think he should have been charged with premeditated first-degree murder, but that's what he was charged with, 1 count of kidnapping resulting in death. Now, you would think between the physical evidence and his recorded confession, Chapman would kind of know he'd been caught red-handed. He'd head into court, face the music, like, they got me, fair and square, but no. During a preliminary hearing on December 5th, 2019, Chapman and his defense attorneys made it clear that he was planning to plead not guilty.
Did you kill Jamie?
Jamie, John?
No.
You didn't tell her? Why'd you tell police you did?
I was on my medication at the time. I don't remember making that statement.
So that clip was of John Chapman being brought into the courthouse, and the reporters are like, what do you think about your confession? And he's like, I don't remember confessing. I was on medication. Yeah, we're going to talk about his medication. And trust me, it's not the kind of medication that would make you falsely confess to a crime and then make you forget that you had done that. No. Ultimately, a federal grand jury would hear the case, and they returned a 1-count indictment charging Chapman with the same crime. He then filed a motion to suppress statements he had made on the night of his arrest to police officers and detectives. Chapman claims that his Miranda warnings were not administered to him properly because, quote, the warning's significance was deliberately minimized and the procedure was characterized as a mere formality, end quote. Dude, come on. You love Dog the Bounty Hunter. You are a fanboy. Like some might say, you're kind of like an obsessed fan, you know, like one that Eminem would write about in a song called Stan. You know about law enforcement procedure. You do know this. You had a fake bail bond agency, okay? You walked around pretending to be law enforcement for the better part of your life. Shut up. You know exactly what Miranda rights are and why they're being read to you. So Chapman also claimed that he was uniquely susceptible to interrogative pressure due to his neurodevelopmental conditions, and he said the detectives had falsely led him to believe that he could avoid the death penalty. Basically, this guy says that the police were aware of his disabilities and they took advantage of him and made him believe he wasn't a suspect in the case, which makes no sense, because if you believing you weren't a suspect in the case made you feel more comfortable to confess to the crime. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why did you fully confess? If they had led you to believe you weren't a suspect, you would have been like, phew, like they're believing my lies. Let me keep going with this. But instead you were like, they don't think I'm a suspect? How dare they? I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them what kind of a suspect I am. It doesn't make any sense. So Detective Wright, who led Chapman's interrogation, he testified that Chapman had instructed he and the other detectives that he did have some mental health disabilities and that he took medication for these issues and that he had taken his meds that day. So I found, luckily I was able to locate this because I couldn't find it anywhere on the internet, but I found basically Chapman's paperwork trying to get his statements thrown out. And there's a portion in this paperwork where they quote Chapman in the interview. And in the interview, Chapman says to Detective Wright, quote, all right, before we start, I do want to tell you, I don't want you guys to think that this means I'm like stupid or can't understand, but I have learning disabilities myself. End quote. Chapman then goes on to inform Wright that he has Tourette's, ADHD, and a type of autism called Asperger's. This is his words, not mine. I didn't quote them. These are exactly what he says. He follows this up by saying, quote, but I don't want you to think that means I don't understand anything that's going on. I do, end quote. And then Detective Wright literally then tells Chapman, quote, and if you need an explanation on anything, if you don't understand, please ask, end quote. And Chapman's like, oh, I will. So he's like setting this up where like, I didn't understand what's being said to me. And he's literally telling the police like, you know, I have Tourette's and autism and ADHD, and but that doesn't mean I'm stupid. It doesn't mean I'm not going to understand everything you're saying, because I do, okay? Like, just so you know. And then I will definitely ask you to clarify if I don't understand. There's absolutely nothing happening in this interview that backs up anything John Matthew Chapman is saying. And by the way, I have ADHD and Asperger's and Tourette's. None of these things are stopped. Like I am in kind of an agreement where I think people who have ADHD, if you don't have it, you don't understand how debilitating it can be as far as like mental organization, as far as like, you know, executive dysfunction, a lot of stuff like that. I definitely think that we should not have late payments on our bills, because it's not that we don't want to pay them, it's that we forget to pay them, or we get lost during the setting up auto pay process and we get bored and we don't want to do that anymore. So like for certain things, I think ADHDers should get a little bit more leeway, but you're sitting down in a police interview and you're fully confessing to a crime, and there's nothing about any of those conditions that would make you confess to a crime you had not committed. Just absolutely not. No. In fact, the ADHD in him would have made that almost impossible to do. So Detective Wright said that no threats or promises were made to Chapman, and Chapman had asked about the death penalty, and Wright simply replied that they would try to help in any way they could as long as Chapman was truthful and straightforward with them. And police do this all the time. First of all, the death penalty isn't even going to end up being what Chapman gets. I don't even think it was on the table. But police are allowed to lie. Do you know police are allowed legally to lie to you during interviews? Like, they are allowed to do that. So this is just useless paperwork that Chapman's filing, causing the taxpayers money, causing everybody just more pain and suffering instead of just going to prison like he should with his head down and disappearing from the world. So obviously all of this, from interviews with the police to phone calls with the police, it was all recorded and admitted into evidence. Chapman wants us to believe that his confession was coerced, but there's absolutely no evidence that it was. And obviously, everyone agrees with me that motion was denied. So at the end of April 2024, John Chapman went on trial for the murder of Jaime Feden. And during the trial, Jamie's neighbor, Carol Stefanitsky, she testified that she knew Jaime was going to Vegas with Chapman, but she never saw her come home. And when she continued to see Chapman coming and going from the townhouse, she grew suspicious, and she asked Chapman about her neighbor. And so Carol became even more suspicious when she was told by Chapman that she wouldn't be seeing much of Jaime anymore. And apparently Chapman kind of followed this up by saying, Jamie's working a new job and she's working long hours. But it was kind of shady boots. And Carol was so worried about Jaime that she texted Jaime about returning a borrowed red purse. Now, Carol and all of these people around Jaime are very smart because they're setting things up. They're trying to figure out what's going on here. Am I overreacting? Are my instincts off? Or is something really wrong? Because Jaime had never borrowed any red purse from Carol, but Carol wanted to see if there was any basis to her fears for Jaime. So when she texted this person who is supposed to be Jaime, and she's like, hey, when are you going to return the red purse? The person wrote back and was like, oh, I'll get it to you as soon as I can, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when Carol says she knew something was wrong because, like I said, Jaime didn't borrow no red purse. So Carol tracked down Jamie's lifelong best friend, Danielle Fenk. And Danielle Fenk testified during the trial that she and Jaime were very close, like basically their whole lives. They were like sisters. But she also felt very protective of Jaime because Jaime was, quote, tiny and trusting, end quote. Danielle also talked about all the pictures that Jaime was sending her as she and Chapman drove to Vegas. And then obviously the pictures and the messages stopped a few days after Jaime got there. And Danielle also said that Jaime truly loved John Chapman and thought that he loved her as well. So a few days later, after Jaime and Chapman drive to Vegas and Jamie's sending Danielle pictures, a few days after that, Danielle received a text from Jamie's phone, and this text said, hey, I'm not coming back to Pennsylvania. I'm staying here in Vegas. I love it here. This is my home now. And this alarmed Danielle because not only did Jaime have a townhouse and a job, but she also had pets that she cared for. And, everybody knew she was kind of planning to eventually move to Vegas, but they thought she was going to come back and get her things and say her goodbyes and stuff. They didn't think she was just going to drive out there and be like, not coming home. So Danielle felt that there was something off, and so she pushed this person pretending to be Jaime for answers. And she claims the texts coming from Jamie's phone, as Danielle pushed, they became increasingly angry and aggressive, and she knew that it was not her old friend because of all the profanity being used. Apparently, Jaime did not swear. It was Danielle Fenk who called the police to do a welfare check on November 14th. That's what good friends are for. Now, Jamie's aunt, Kristen Lewis, she also testified that she was the co-signer of the trust that paid for Jamie's townhouse and ensured that her utilities and bills were taken care of. And Lewis also talked about how Jaime and John Chapman had actually known each other for a while, almost 10 years. And even though the relationship was tumultuous and very on again, off again, Chapman had been the only boyfriend Jaime had ever had. So basically, he's toxic. He's keeping her in a toxic push-pull kind of scenario. He's also married, and has several girlfriends on the side. But Jaime doesn't know what a relationship looks like because this is the only one she's ever had, and he's kind of keeping her on the hook and using her and taking her money while he's doing whatever he wants on the side and, living his own life without her. So the defense for John Chapman tried to say, with their chest and with a straight face, that this wasn't murder, it had been an accidental death. They claimed that Jaime and John had a unique relationship and that when the two were intimate, Jaime often consented to being tied up and duct taped, which is exactly what happened that day in the desert. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I think his lawyers are as dumb as Chapman is, honestly, at this point. So the defense then presented a half-an-hour slideshow of what has been referred to as pornographic images of different women bound and gagged and duct-taped during sexual acts. And according to online sources, at least one of these photos showed Jaime herself. So nothing like the defense team continuing to victimize the victim even after death. The jury was also shown a picture of a rope in the drawer of Jaime's nightstand, which to me, and I would hope to anybody, means absolutely nothing. Like, a rope? What is this, a game of Clue? First of all, a person can enjoy this type of sex play, bondage and being tied up and things like that. And it does not mean that it's their fault or not a crime if their murderer decides to end their life this way. In fact, it would just make the murderer's motive and story more easy to believe if a person was into sex play like this and if it was known by people. Secondly, John Chapman was in and out of Jaime's townhouse for 2 months after she died. He could have put that rope there at any time to add strength to his story. Also, it could just be a rope, like to tie things up. Maybe not the body, all right, but just like to tie things up with. It's just so stupid. Like, it's the definition of reaching. It's the definition of stretching. It's the definition of just contextually destroying something and taking a rope and being like, see, she was under bondage. It's a rope in her drawer. None of it mattered, though, because thankfully, most people have enough brain cells to put 2 and 2 together, and the jury found John Matthew Chapman guilty. And in August of 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison, which of course he has appealed. But what else is new with these types of monsters? Look at that. Detective Wright wasn't lying to you after all, John. They did try to help. You didn't get the death penalty. You should, but you didn't. I now want to come back to Kelly Murray, John Chapman's ex-wife, to whom he was married to for years, and who claims she had no idea that her husband was also seeing Jaime the entire time they were married. I feel like there's more to this story, and I know that there's going to be comments about it. I know that if I didn't address it, there'd be comments, and I'd want to be part of that conversation. I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, and I'm certainly not saying that Kelly Murray was not also a victim of John Chapman, because she was. But was she more complicit in things than she's really being, upfront about? If you think about it, Kelly Murray was married to John when he carried out his horrible tax scams. She stayed with him after this, which, why? Clearly he's a horrible person. And she stayed with him when he moved her and himself into another woman's home. And then while they lived there, she had to pretend to be John Chapman's sister, not his wife. And she never questioned this. And while they all lived together, it didn't occur to her that the relationship between John and Jaime seemed like close and intimate. And whose bed was John sleeping in, right? Was he sleeping with Kelly? That would have been weird since she was supposedly his sister. Was he sleeping with Jaime? That should have seemed weird to Kelly since she was actually his wife. And I just don't know how many wives would be okay with that kind of nonsense. Did he have his own room and then he was sneaking into their rooms at night, like some weird big love stuff? I don't know, man, but I have a distinct feeling that Kelly knew more about what was happening to Jaime at the hands of John Chapman than she's letting on. She knew he was taking Jaime's money. She said that. She knew he was lying to Jaime about, his marriage and about being married because he made his wife pretend to be a sister. None of this raised red flags. None of this made you be like, all right, dude, I've had enough, right? Between the tax schemes and you trying to get me to take the fall for your illegal scams and you probably suck in other ways, and you lie about being the uncle of Dog the Bounty Hunter, and you're kind of weird, and you pretend you're a bounty hunter, and now you got me living in some girl's house, and I have to pretend to be your sister. Like, enough. I'm done. This has gone too far. I don't understand how Kelly would have just been blissfully ignorant to what was happening around her when she lived with them. Make that make sense for me. Because remember, John and Jamie were apparently on again and off again for 10 years. So it's not like they just met and they started like forming a romantic relationship while Kelly and John lived with Jamie. And then that's why, they eventually got a divorce because Kelly was like, clearly you got something going on with Jamie and I'm going to leave. I feel like weird and I'm a third wheel. That's not what happened. Make that make sense for me if you can. I'm certainly not saying that Kelly Murray knew what was going to happen to Jamie. I don't believe that. But I'm also not discounting that she could have been more actively involved in the scam to take and use Jamie's money than she's letting on. And that's just my opinion. Allegedly, don't come for me. Okay, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I'm sure it's a hot take. I'm sure there's going to be some people who are mad, like, how dare you say that? You hate victims. And there's going to be some people that are like, yeah, we can see that. But let me know what you think. And as we've already touched on, John Matthew Chapman is not a criminal mastermind. Far from it. He is a run-of-the-mill con artist who I believe exacerbated his own mental health issues, as he calls them, or his own, cognitive issues in order to get close to people who did have these kinds of disabilities because he knew that they would be easy targets from him. He attended a school, a special needs school, and he wasn't, friends with these people that he attended the school with. He wasn't friends with his classmates. He used them. And he stole their names and social security numbers to steal money from them. And then he's, with Jamie, which is apparently where they met, by the way. I've seen that printed in a few sources, but not enough for me to know for absolute sure. But apparently they met at this school. So then he's, with Jamie and obviously not having a real relationship. He doesn't actually care about her. He doesn't actually love her. He's using her. That's what con men do. They just use people. They don't find people to have any value or to even be real, right? Like Adam Braden said to John, people are resources. That's how a con man looks at people. What can I get from them? What can they do for me? This was never a real relationship. None of his relationships or marriages were real. He was just using people, and that's what he just always has done. And that's why, there's only so long that you can kind of do that and get away with it and escalate before you get caught. And because he's just a basic run-of-the-mill con artist, he's not a smart criminal mastermind, and he just left a trail of, I was going to say breadcrumbs, but he left a trail of buttermilk biscuits behind him, man. All right? Just like full-ass loaves of bread everywhere he went. So he was not good at this. But what he did to Jamie is unacceptable. It is outrageous. And for what? A few $100 that you weren't going to get once people realized she wasn't coming back? I don't think that's all it was. I don't think it's all it was. I think that, and I think one of his ex-wives, I think it was his ex-wife or his current wife, I can't remember which, said, Jamie knew something and found out something about him, and that's why he killed her. I'm kind of on that page too. There's no way he killed her for money, because when she's dead, she's not going to get the money anymore. The trust money isn't going to go into his account anymore. I think that Jamie found out something, confronted him, and so he killed her. Or maybe he felt like she was finding something out, or maybe he felt like she was getting too close. But he's kind of been pulling the strings in this relationship for a while. Because if you look back to that news interview where Jamie was talking about being discriminated at the casino, I don't think that was coming from her. You can see her walking, and the news refers to him as a male friend who was at the casino with her that night. That's John Matthew Chapman in that video. I think he brought her to the casino, told her to leave her ID behind, and was hoping that the casino wouldn't let her in so that they could file, like a civil lawsuit against the casino and claim discrimination and stuff. And that's why they went public with it, and that's why they were on the news. I genuinely think that's what happened because, I feel for Jamie, and it's like, yeah, you do look kind of young, and I understand that that's hard, but you're going into a casino. Nobody should be allowed to go into a casino without a valid ID. I don't care who you are, because even if you were, and I've been denied, if I forget my ID and I want to buy a drink, I've been denied, and I'm clearly a 40-something-year-old woman, but it's just protocol. And I think that John Matthew Chapman, that idiot with these stupid schemes, was just looking for another scheme. And he was going to use Jamie to try to make that happen. And when it didn't, because, obviously, legally, the casino's probably like, what did we do wrong? We need valid ID. We need valid ID to let somebody in. It wasn't because of how she looked. It was because she didn't have her ID, right? So that probably went nowhere, and that didn't work. And I just think that she wanted to be loved. She lived a hard life. She probably felt like it was hard to be accepted. And when somebody made her feel accepted and loved, she threw herself into it and was kind of under his control and would kind of go along with whatever he wanted. And it's very, very sad. But this person, John Matthew Chapman, is going to be in prison for the rest of his life. And unfortunately, we have to be satisfied with that because Jamie is gone and we can't bring her back. But let me know what you think about this case in the comment section below. I am very interested in hearing, your thoughts about this one, especially about Kelly and her role in what was going on with Jamie and John. And prayers and thoughts are sent to Jamie's family and friends who were worried about her for so long, rightly so. And it's just very sad. So like this video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. Love you so much. Bye.